Vincent Liu straightened his tie for the third time that morning as he waited in his home office. The grandfather clock in the corner chimed 9 times, echoing through the spacious house that suddenly felt too quiet. For 23 years, Mrs. Patterson had been the steady heartbeat of their home. She knew exactly how his mother liked her tea, which corner of the house caught the best morning light, and somehow always appeared with a warm meal just when everyone needed it most. But Mrs. Patterson had finally retired last month, leaving behind only her secret recipe for dumplings and a house that no longer ran like clockwork. Vincent had tried managing with temporary help for weeks, but nothing worked. The coffee was always too weak, his shirts came back wrinkled, and his mother kept asking in Mandarin where the real housekeeper had gone. The doorbell rang, interrupting his thoughts. Vincent walked to the front door, checking his reflection in the hallway mirror. Even after building a tech company from nothing, interviewing housekeepers made him nervous. Maybe because this wasn't about quarterly reports or market strategies. This was about trusting someone with his family. He opened the door to find a woman in her late 30s standing on his doorstep. She had kind eyes and carried herself with quiet confidence. Her dark skin glowed in the morning sunlight, and she wore a simple blue dress that looked both professional and approachable. "Mr. Liu? I'm Carmen Valdez from Premier Home Services. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me." Her voice was warm with a slight accent that Vincent couldn't quite place. He shook her hand and invited her inside, noticing how she wiped her feet carefully on the mat and looked around with genuine appreciation rather than judgment. "Your home is beautiful," Carmen said as they walked toward the living room. "The agency mentioned you have specific needs?" Vincent nodded, gesturing for her to sit on the cream-colored sofa. "Yes, well, it's complicated. My mother lives with us and she's particular about how things are done. My previous housekeeper understood her ways, but now—" He trailed off, not sure how to explain that his 70-year-old mother had been sulking for weeks because nobody could fold fitted sheets the way she liked or remembered to buy the specific brand of rice she preferred. Carmen smiled. "Older? Family members often have routines that matter to them. What does your mother enjoy? What makes her comfortable?" Something in her tone made Vincent relax slightly. Most candidates had asked about salary and duties. Carmen was asking about his mother as a person. She likes her morning walks, reads Chinese newspapers, watches cooking shows. She's been in America for 40 years, but Mandarin is still her first language. Sometimes I think she feels a bit isolated. "That must be hard for her," Carmen said softly. "And for you, watching her feel that way." Before Vincent could respond, footsteps echoed from the staircase. His mother appeared, moving slowly but steadily, wearing her favorite purple cardigan. She looked at Carmen with curious eyes, then rattled off something in rapid Mandarin to Vincent. Vincent felt his cheeks warm. "She's asking who you are and why you're here. She's direct." To his complete shock, Carmen stood up and bowed slightly toward his mother. Then, in clear, respectful Mandarin, she said, "Good morning, grandmother. My name is Carmen. I hope to help take care of your beautiful home, if you'll have me." The silence that followed felt like it stretched for hours. Vincent's mother's eyes widened, then narrowed, then softened completely. She responded in Mandarin, speaking faster than Vincent had heard her talk in months. Carmen listened carefully, nodding and responding appropriately. Vincent caught bits and pieces, something about tea, about respectful young women, about being surprised. Finally, his mother switched to English, though she still looked at Carmen. She speaks better Mandarin than my son, she announced with a slight smile. Vincent felt his jaw drop. How did you learn Mandarin? Carmen settled back into her seat, looking slightly embarrassed. I worked for the Wong family for 3 years. Mrs. Wong taught me because she said it helped her feel less homesick when someone could talk with her in her own language. I kept studying after that job ended because language is like a bridge, isn't it? It connects people. Vincent's mother was still staring at Carmen with something like wonder. She shuffled over and sat down heavily in her favorite armchair. You learned Chinese for a job? I learned Chinese for a person, Carmen corrected gently. Mrs. Wong was lonely. Her children were always busy, and her husband traveled constantly. She taught me to cook her grandmother's soup recipe, and I taught her to salsa dance in her kitchen. Language was just part of caring for her. Vincent watched this exchange, feeling like he was seeing his mother for the first time in months. Her whole posture had changed. She was sitting straighter, more engaged than she'd been since Mrs. Patterson left. Tell me about your experience, Vincent said, trying to regain some control over the interview. Carmen spent the next 20 minutes outlining her background. She'd been cleaning houses since she was 18, working her way through community college. She'd cared for elderly parents, managed households with teenagers, even helped families through difficult transitions like divorce or job loss. I don't just clean, she explained. I try to understand what each family needs. Some need organization, some need flexibility, some need someone who can be invisible, others need someone who can be part of the family rhythm. And what do you think we need? Vincent asked. Carmen glanced at his mother, who was listening intently despite pretending to read her newspaper. I think you need someone who can help your mother feel valued and heard. Someone who can bring some warmth back to this house. And someone who understands that taking care of a home means taking care of the people in it, not just the furniture and floors. As if summoned by their conversation, 17-year-old Isabella appeared at the bottom of the stairs. Vincent's daughter moved like she was carrying the weight of the world, her backpack stuffed with textbooks, her face already focused on whatever academic challenge awaited her that day. Dad, I need $20 for the field trip form, and can you sign this permission slip for the SAT prep class? Isabella barely looked up from her phone as she spoke. Isabella, we have a guest, Vincent said, his voice carrying a slight edge of correction. Isabella finally looked up, offering Carmen a quick smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Oh, sorry, hi. This is Carmen. She might be our new housekeeper. Cool, Isabella said. But Vincent noticed how she avoided eye contact with Carmen. Can I get the money? I'm going to be late. Carmen watched this exchange quietly, and Vincent saw something flicker across her face. Understanding, maybe, or concern. After Isabella rushed out with her $20 and signed permission slip, Carmen turned back to Vincent. She seems like a bright girl. Busy schedule? Very busy. Advanced placement classes, SAT prep, violin lessons, volunteer work for college applications. She's got a good head on her shoulders. Carmen nodded thoughtfully. That's a lot for anyone to manage. Something in her tone made Vincent slightly defensive. She's capable. Our family believes in working hard, achieving excellence. My parents came here with nothing, built something meaningful. I want Isabella to understand that success requires sacrifice. Of course, Carmen said carefully. Success is important, but so is balance. Vincent's mother had been listening to this entire conversation. Now she spoke up in English, her words deliberate. Carmen understands families. I like her. It wasn't just approval. It was a declaration. Vincent realized his mother had already made her decision. When could you start? Vincent found himself asking. Carmen smiled, the first completely natural smile he'd seen from her that morning. Tomorrow, if you'd like. I believe in jumping in with both feet. As Vincent walked Carmen to the door, she paused on the threshold. Mr. Liu, may I ask you something? He nodded. What does success look like for your family? Not professionally, but personally. What would make you all truly happy? The question caught him off guard. He was used to defining success in metrics, in achievements, in measurable outcomes. Personal happiness felt like uncharted territory. I want my family to be proud of who they are and what they've accomplished, he said. Finally, Carmen studied his face for a moment. That's a beautiful goal. Sometimes the path to pride looks different than we expect. After she left, Vincent found his mother in the kitchen, humming softly as she prepared her lunch. She looked up when he entered. She's good, this Carmen, she said in English. She sees people, not just work to be done. Vincent poured himself coffee from the pot Carmen had somehow managed to make perfectly during their conversation. You think she'll fit in here? His mother gave him a look that reminded him of every lecture she'd given him as a child. The question isn't whether she'll fit in. The question is whether we're ready to let someone help us be better. That evening, as Vincent reviewed quarterly reports in his office, he found himself thinking about Carmen's question. What would make his family truly happy? He realized he wasn't entirely sure he knew the answer anymore. 3 weeks into her new job, Carmen had developed a rhythm that felt almost like dancing. She moved through the Liu house with quiet efficiency, but more importantly, she moved with awareness. Every family had its own heartbeat, its own silent language of needs and worries. The Liu family's heartbeat was fast, anxious, and getting faster every day. Carmen noticed everything. How Vincent left for work before 7 each morning, his coffee mug abandoned half full on the kitchen counter. How Isabella stumbled downstairs looking exhausted, grabbing a granola bar instead of eating the breakfast her grandmother had carefully prepared. How Grandmother Liu stood at the kitchen window after everyone left, watching birds in the garden, with lonely eyes. It was during her second week that Carmen started talking to Grandmother Liu in Mandarin while she worked. Not because she had to, but because the older woman lit up whenever someone spoke her native language. It started with simple things. The morning glory flowers are blooming beautifully, Carmen would say in Mandarin as she dusted the windowsill. Yes, but they need more water, Grandmother Liu would respond, grateful for the conversation. But as days passed, their talks grew deeper. Carmen began sharing small observations, the way a neighbor might comment on the weather, except her comments were about the family she was growing to care for. Isabella looks very tired these days, Carmen murmured in Mandarin one Tuesday morning as she folded laundry. She was still awake when I left last night at 8. I could see her bedroom light from the driveway. Grandmother Liu sighed heavily. She studies too much. When Vincent was her age, he studied hard too, but he also played basketball, had friends. Isabella only has books. Carmen continued folding Vincent's shirts, each crease precise and careful. In my country, we have a saying, a tree that bends survives the storm. A tree that is too rigid breaks. Vincent doesn't understand this, Grandmother Liu said quietly. He thinks success only comes from being rigid, from never bending. As the days continued, Carmen's observations became more pointed, though always gentle. She spoke the way a concerned aunt might speak, someone who loved the family but could see them clearly because she wasn't caught up in their daily drama. "This morning Isabella barely touched her breakfast again," Carmen mentioned in Mandarin while organizing the spice cabinet. "She used to love her grandmother's cooking. Now she looks at food like it's another task to complete." Grandmother Liu was cutting vegetables for lunch, but Carmen noticed her knife movements had become sharper, more aggressive. "Vincent pushes her to be perfect. Perfect grades, perfect activities, perfect college applications, but nobody can be perfect all the time. In the Dominican Republic, my mother used to say that children are like gardens," Carmen said softly, switching to Mandarin. "Some flowers need full sun, some need shade. Some need lots of water, some prefer drought. But all gardens need patience." Carmen didn't realize that Vincent had come home early that day. He was standing in the hallway, still holding his briefcase, listening to every word. His Mandarin was rusty, but he understood enough. Something cold and defensive rose in his chest. Who was this woman to comment on his parenting? What did she know about raising a child in America, about the competition Isabella faced, about the expectations placed on their family? But he said nothing. Not yet. The next morning, Carmen noticed Isabella had fallen asleep at the kitchen table. Her calculus homework spread around her like fallen leaves. Her pencil was still in her hand, and there were eraser marks all over the paper where she'd tried to solve the same problem multiple times. Carmen gently touched the girl's shoulder. "Isabella, honey, you'll hurt your neck sleeping like this." Isabella jerked awake, looking confused and panicked. "What time is it?" "Oh no, I didn't finish the problem set. Dad's going to be so disappointed." "It's only 6:30. "You have time," Carmen said gently. "But when did you go to sleep last night?" "I didn't really sleep. I kept thinking about the SAT practice test on Saturday. My math score needs to go up 50 points, or I won't get into the schools Dad wants me to apply to." Carmen watched Isabella, frantically gathering her papers, and something in the girl's voice reminded Carmen of a bird trapped in a cage, beating its wings against the bars. "Isabella," Carmen said carefully, "what schools do you want to apply to?" The question seemed to confuse Isabella. She stopped moving and looked at Carmen with genuine puzzlement. What do you mean?" "I mean, if you could go anywhere, study anything, what would make you excited to wake up in the morning?" Isabella stared at her for a long moment. "I've never really thought about that. Dad has a list. He's researched all the best programs, the ones that will set me up for success." "But what would set you up for happiness?" Before Isabella could answer, Vincent appeared in the kitchen, already, dressed for work. His expression was neutral, but Carmen sensed tension in the way he moved. "Isabella, why are you still in your pajamas? You should be getting ready for school." "I was just finishing homework, Dad." "You should have finished it last night." Time management is a crucial skill. Carmen watched this exchange while preparing Vincent's coffee. She noticed how Isabella's shoulders sagged slightly, how the spark of curiosity that had been in her eyes just moments before disappeared completely. After Isabella went upstairs to get ready, Vincent lingered in the kitchen. Carmen could feel him watching her as she cleaned the breakfast dishes. "Carmen," he said finally, his voice carefully controlled, "I appreciate your help with household tasks, but I'd prefer if you didn't give Isabella advice about school or college planning." Carmen dried her hands slowly, choosing her words carefully. Of course, Mr. Liu. I was just making conversation. I'm sure you meant well, but Isabella has enough guidance in her life. Too many voices can be confusing for a teenager. Carmen nodded, but something in Vincent's tone made her think about the conversations she'd been having with Grandmother Liu. Had he been listening? Did he understand more Mandarin than he let on? That afternoon, while Vincent was at work, Carmen found Grandmother Liu sitting in the garden, staring at nothing in particular. "You look sad today," Carmen said in Mandarin, settling onto the bench beside her. "I'm worried about Isabella and about Vincent. They used to laugh together when she was little. Now they only talk about grades and schedules." Carmen had been thinking about this, too. Sometimes parents love so hard they forget to love gently. Vincent's father was very strict with him, Grandmother Liu explained. Always pushing, always demanding more. Vincent succeeded, but I sometimes wonder what it cost him. Now he's doing the same thing to Isabella. What was Vincent like as a child? Carmen asked, genuinely curious. Grandmother Liu's face softened. He was creative. He loved to draw, to build things with his hands. He wanted to be an architect when he was Isabella's age, but his father said architecture wasn't practical, wasn't secure enough. So Vincent studied computer science instead. And now he's successful. Yes, he's successful. But sometimes I watch him and wonder if he's happy. Really happy deep down. That evening, Carmen stayed later than usual to help with dinner preparations. Isabella came home from violin practice looking exhausted, and Vincent arrived shortly after, carrying his laptop and already talking on his phone about some business crisis. During dinner, Carmen served quietly while the family ate in relative silence. Vincent asked Isabella about her day, but his questions were all focused on academics. How was the calculus test? Had she started the college essay? What were her scores on the latest practice SAT? Isabella answered each question dutifully, but Carmen noticed the girl was barely eating. She pushed food around her plate, took tiny bites, and kept checking her phone for the time. "Isabella, put your phone away during dinner," Vincent said, sharply. "Sorry, Dad. I was just checking the time. I have 3 hours of homework left, and I wanted to make sure I'd have enough time." 3 hours? What subjects? AP Chemistry Lab report, Calculus problem set, English essay, and I need to study for the history test tomorrow. Vincent nodded approvingly. "Good. That's the kind of dedication that will pay off." Carmen was clearing the salad plates when she noticed Grandmother Liu watching Isabella with deep concern. The older woman said something in Mandarin very quietly. "Isabella looks thin. She's not eating enough." Carmen glanced at Vincent, wondering if he'd heard and understood. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but he continued cutting his chicken as if nothing had been said. "Schools are very competitive now," Carmen responded in Mandarin, her voice gentle but carrying an observation. "Sometimes young people push themselves too hard trying to meet expectations." "The expectations—" "Keep growing," Grandmother Liu said, still in Mandarin. "When is enough enough?" This time, Carmen was certain Vincent had understood. His fork paused halfway to his mouth, and she saw a muscle in his cheek twitch, but he said nothing. After dinner, as Carmen finished cleaning the kitchen, she could hear Vincent upstairs helping Isabella with her calculus homework. Their voices carried down the hallway, and Carmen could hear the frustration building in both of them. "No, Isabella, you're making the same mistake again. Focus." "I am focusing, Dad. I've been focusing for 4 hours." "Then focus harder. This isn't optional." Your future depends on mastering this material. Carmen found herself gripping the dish towel tighter as she listened. In the living room, Grandmother Liu had turned up the volume on her Chinese cooking show, but Carmen could see the worry in her posture. When Carmen finally left that night, she drove home thinking about gardens again, about flowers that needed different amounts of sunlight, different amounts of water, about the difference between growing something strong and growing something that could survive. She thought about Isabella's question that morning. What would make her excited to wake up? And she wondered if Isabella even remembered what excitement felt like anymore, or if it had been buried under so many expectations that she'd forgotten it was supposed to be there at all. Most of all, she thought about Vincent, and how love could sometimes look like pressure when seen from the outside. How a father's desire to protect his daughter's future could accidentally steal her present, and how sometimes the people who loved each other most were the ones who had the hardest time seeing each other clearly. I've been trying to tell you for months that I'm drowning, but you keep throwing me more weights and calling it preparation for swimming. Carmen listened. Carmen saw that I was disappearing, but you were too busy being disappointed in my test scores to notice that I was disappearing entirely. Carmen watched father and daughter stare at each other across the kitchen, and she realized this moment had been inevitable from the day she started working here. The pressure had been building for too long. The love had become too heavy to carry. Isabella looked at Carmen with something like gratitude mixed with desperation. "Thank you for seeing me," she said simply. Then she walked out of the kitchen, leaving Vincent standing there with his mouth open and his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. Grandmother Liu spoke into the silence, her voice gentle, but firm, in perfect English. "Vincent, my son, sometimes the people who love us most are the ones brave enough to tell us when we're wrong." Carmen quietly picked up her bag and walked toward the door, leaving behind a family that was finally, painfully, ready to have the conversation they should have been having all along. "I've been trying to tell you for months that I'm drowning, but you keep throwing me more weights and calling it preparation for swimming." Carmen listened. Carmen saw that I was disappearing, but you were too busy being disappointed in my test scores to notice that I was disappearing entirely. Carmen watched father and daughter stare at each other across the kitchen, and she realized this moment had been inevitable from the day she started working here. The pressure had been building for too long. The love had become too heavy to carry. Isabella looked at Carmen with something like gratitude mixed with desperation. "Thank you for seeing me," she said simply. Then she walked out of the kitchen, leaving Vincent standing there with his mouth open and his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. Grandmother Liu spoke into the silence, her voice gentle, but firm, in perfect English. "Vincent, my son, sometimes the people who love us most are the ones brave enough to tell us when we're wrong." Carmen quietly picked up her bag and walked toward the door, leaving behind a family that was finally, painfully, ready to have the conversation they should have been having all along. Vincent stood alone in his kitchen for 20 minutes after everyone left, staring at the SAT prep books scattered across the table. The house felt different now, like something fundamental had shifted in its foundation. The silence wasn't peaceful anymore. It was hollow. He picked up one of Isabella's practice tests, looking at the numbers she'd been so worried about. Suddenly, the scores that had seemed so important an hour ago looked like just marks on paper. When had numbers become more important than his daughter's happiness? When had he stopped seeing Isabella and started seeing only her potential? Upstairs, he could hear Isabella's door close with a soft click, not a slam, which somehow made it worse. A slam would have been anger. This quiet closing felt like giving up. Grandmother Liu was still sitting at the kitchen table, her hands folded in her lap, watching Vincent with eyes that had seen too much family pain over the years. "She didn't eat dinner," Grandmother Liu said quietly in English. Vincent looked at Isabella's plate, still full of the food his mother had prepared with love. How had he not noticed that his daughter barely ate anymore? How had he missed so many signs? "Mom," Vincent said, sitting down heavily across from her. "Was I wrong?" Grandmother Liu studied her son's face for a long moment. "Do you remember when you were Isabella's age? You wanted to be an architect. You used to draw buildings for hours, creating these beautiful designs." Vincent nodded slowly. He hadn't thought about those drawings in years. "Your father told you architecture wasn't practical. He said you needed a stable career, something that would guarantee success, so you studied computer science instead." "And it worked out," Vincent said defensively. "I built a successful company. I gave this family security." "Yes, you did. But Vincent, do you remember the last time you drew a building just for fun?" The question hit him like a physical blow. He couldn't remember. Somewhere between building his company and raising Isabella, he'd forgotten that he'd ever wanted to create beautiful things just because they made him happy. "I wanted to protect her from making my mistakes," Vincent said quietly. "But whose mistakes were they really? Yours or your father's?" Vincent felt something crack inside his chest. All these years, he'd thought he was protecting Isabella from the struggles he'd faced. But maybe he'd been protecting her from the wrong things. Maybe he'd been so afraid of her failing that he'd forgotten to let her succeed in her own way. The next morning, Vincent woke up early and found Isabella already in the kitchen, making coffee with shaking hands. She looked like she hadn't slept at all. "Isabella," he started, but she held up a hand to stop him. "Dad, I need to say something before I lose my nerve." Her voice was hoarse but determined. "I know you love me. I know everything you do comes from wanting me to have a good life. But I can't keep living like this." Vincent felt his throat tighten. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I can't remember the last time I felt proud of something I accomplished instead of just relieved that I didn't disappoint you. I can't remember the last time I did something because I enjoyed it instead of because it would look good on college applications." Isabella sat down across from him, and Vincent saw how thin she'd gotten, how dark the circles under her eyes had become. When had his beautiful, vibrant daughter started looking so fragile? "I used to love learning," Isabella continued. "Remember when I was little how I used to ask you a million questions about everything? When did learning become something I was afraid of instead of excited about?" Vincent remembered. He remembered a 6-year-old Isabella who wanted to know how airplanes stayed in the sky, who collected rocks because she thought they were beautiful, who made up stories about the neighbor's cats. When had that curious little girl disappeared? "I never wanted you to be afraid," Vincent said, his voice barely a whisper. "But I am afraid, Dad. I'm terrified all the time. Terrified of not being good enough, of letting you down, of not living up to what this family expects from me. Carmen saw that. She saw that I was drowning, and she tried to help." At the mention of Carmen's name, Vincent felt shame wash over him. "Isabella, about Carmen. You fired her because she cared about me. Because she saw me as a person instead of just a list of achievements." Vincent ran his hands through his hair. I was angry. I felt like she was criticizing everything I'd tried to do for you. Maybe she was. Maybe someone needed to. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of years of unspoken pressure hanging between them. What do you want, Isabella? Vincent asked finally. Not what I want for you, not what looks good on paper. What do you actually want? Isabella's eyes filled with tears. I don't know anymore, Dad. I've been so busy trying to be what you wanted that I forgot to figure out who I am. The honesty in her voice broke Vincent's heart. This was what his protection had accomplished. He'd tried so hard to secure her future, that he'd stolen her present. I want to find out, Isabella said, wiping her eyes. I want to remember what it feels like to be excited about something instead of just stressed about it. And I want you to trust me enough to let me figure it out. Even if I make mistakes. Vincent thought about his own father, about the pressure he'd felt to be perfect, to never fail, to always choose the safe path. He'd spent his whole life proving he was worthy of success, but he'd never stopped to ask if he was worthy of happiness. I'm going to call Carmen, he said suddenly. Isabella looked surprised. Dad, you fired her. I know. I was wrong. About a lot of things. 2 hours later, Vincent found himself standing on Carmen's doorstep, feeling more nervous than he had during any business presentation. When Carmen opened the door, her expression was carefully neutral. Mr. Liu. Carmen, I owe you an apology. Several apologies, actually. Carmen stepped aside to let him in. Her apartment was small but warm, filled with plants and photographs and the kind of comfortable clutter that made a place feel like home. You were right, Vincent said without preamble. About Isabella, about the pressure, about everything. I was so afraid of her failing that I forgot to let her succeed. Carmen sat down across from him, her expression softening slightly. Mr. Liu, I never meant to criticize your parenting. I just saw a young woman who was hurting, and I couldn't stay silent. That's exactly what you should have done. What I should have been doing all along. Vincent told Carmen about his conversation with Isabella, about his own memories of wanting to be an architect, about the realization that he'd been repeating his father's mistakes instead of learning from them. I don't know how to fix this, he admitted. I don't know how to love her without pressuring her, how to support her without controlling her. Carmen was quiet for a moment, then smiled gently. Mr. Liu, do you remember what I said about gardens? That different flowers need different amounts of sunlight and water. That's part of it. But the most important thing about gardening is that you have to trust the plant to grow. You can provide good soil, the right amount of water, protection from harsh weather, but you can't force a flower to bloom. You can only create the conditions where blooming is possible. Vincent felt something loosen in his chest. And if the flower grows differently than I expected, then you learn to love the flower it actually is, instead of mourning the flower you thought it should be. When Vincent returned home, he found Isabella and Grandmother Liu cooking together in the kitchen. They were making dumplings, and Isabella was laughing at something her grandmother had said. The sound of his daughter's laughter stopped Vincent in his doorway. When was the last time he'd heard that sound? Dad? Isabella looked up, flour on her cheeks and happiness in her eyes for the first time in months. Everything okay? Everything's perfect, Vincent said, and meant it. That evening at dinner, Vincent did something he hadn't done in years. Instead of asking Isabella about test scores or college applications, he asked her what had made her laugh while cooking with her grandmother. Grandma was telling me about when you were little, Isabella said, grinning. About how you used to build elaborate cities out of blocks and then draw architectural plans for them. Vincent felt his cheeks warm. I'd forgotten about that. She still has some of your drawings. They're beautiful, Dad. You were really talented. I still am, Vincent said, surprising himself. Maybe I should start drawing again. Maybe we could draw together sometime, Isabella suggested tentatively. I used to love art class before I got too busy for electives. I'd like that, Vincent said, and realized he really would. After dinner, Vincent made another phone call. Carmen, it's Vincent Liu. I was wondering if you'd consider coming back to work for us. Not as just a housekeeper, but as part of the family. We need someone who can help us remember how to see each other clearly. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Are you sure, Mr. Liu? I haven't changed my opinions about balance and patience. I'm counting on that, Vincent said. We need someone who's brave enough to tell us when we're wrong, someone who sees people instead of just potential. In that case, Carmen said, and Vincent could hear the smile in her voice, I'd be honored to come back. 6 months later, Isabella's SAT scores had improved, but more importantly, she'd started painting again. She was still planning for college, but now she was also planning for happiness. Vincent had started sketching in the evenings, and sometimes Isabella would join him, and they'd create impossible buildings together while talking about dreams instead of just goals. Carmen continued to murmur observations in Mandarin to Grandmother Liu, but now Vincent listened to them with gratitude instead of defensiveness. Because Carmen had taught them all something invaluable, that love isn't about creating perfect people. It's about creating space for people to become perfectly themselves, and sometimes that's the most beautiful garden of all.